Hi, this is Carrie Brownstein.
This is DJ Premier.
This is Darren Aronofsky.
You got the RZA right here.
Rose McGowan.
Radiohead.
Aisha Tyler.
Tribe Called Quest. Fred Armisen.
Prince Paul.
Javier Munoz. Seth Meyers.
Frankie Cosmos.
Flying Lotus.
Hi, we're Chaim, and you're listening to the Talk House podcast.
What's up? What is up? I'm your host, Elia Einhorn. Welcome back to the Talk House podcast. I have two very special guests with me to introduce today's show. Sitting in studio here in Bushwick, Brooklyn, the one, the only, the TalkHouse.com film editor-in-chief, Nick Dawson. Nick, welcome back to the show.
Thank you for having me. Very excited to be back.
And joining us from North Carolina, the deputy editor of VanityFair.com and a host of Vanity Fair's awards podcast, Little Gold Men, Katie Rich. Katie, it's been too long. Thanks for joining us again.
Hi, it's so good to be back.
Today's show is a collaboration between Talkhouse and Little Gold Men and features two fantastic directors in conversation, Lulu Wang and Ruben Östlund. Nick, how did this one come together?
Katie and I had been talking about the fact that we really wanted to get Lulu on our respective shows. And when I reached out to her, she was very excited to talk to Ruben. I happened to be Facebook friends with him. And so it was actually one of those remarkably simple things to put together. I just dropped him a line. He wrote back really quickly. And all we needed to do is find an engineer in Gothenburg. Pretty straightforward, right?
This is our first time working in Gothenburg. It's also Lulu's first time on the show. We are, of course, big fans of her new movie, The Farewell.
Yeah, no, it's a great movie. You know, it was one of the sort of standout films of Sundance, got picked up by A24, and had a really strong showing at the indie box office this summer.
Yeah, I got to be one of the lucky people who watched it roll out over the course of the summer since I no longer live in New York or LA. And it just opened in my town a couple weeks ago at the local art house. Watching other audiences discover it after these, weeks and months of discussion since Sundance, it just felt like such a wonderful summer gift. And I love it when A24 in particular has had a good track record of bringing us these excellent indies in the middle of summer, kind of just when we need them most.
Yeah, so this is Lulu's second film. She directed the 2014 movie Posthumous, but this is really her breakout movie. It's a really smart and sweet and sensitive movie. For people who don't have it on their radar already, this is a movie based on Lulu's personal experience about her going to China to visit her grandmother when she's terminally ill. But the movie's hook is that nobody's telling the grandmother that she is terminally ill, and it's about saying goodbye when you're not actually allowed to say goodbye, when there is that decision to withhold the information. And it's a really beautifully made film. And, when Lulu was talking to Ruben in the conversation we recorded, she talks about the drama, of not having those big moments, which I think is really fascinating.
Yeah, and something else I think she and Ruben talk about is what I think is such a powerful aspect of The Farewell is that it's this very specific story. It's set in China. It's about this Chinese family. It's about what's apparently a fairly common thing in China where you might not tell an elderly relative that they're dying, but it feels so universal. It feels like you're kind of inserting yourself right within this family. And I know so many people who have just recognized part of themselves and their families and maybe their grandparents in The Farewell, which I think is why it's a powerful film and why it's doing so well at the box office.
Absolutely. No, it's definitely universal. And it was really cool to hear Ruben talk about him relating to the film so strongly. And it's, as somebody who is from a very different background, he's a Swedish director. His major movies are Force Majeure and Square, which won the Palme d'Or at Cannes in 2017 and went on to be Oscar nominated for Best Foreign Language Film. And, he's sort of one of the titans of the new European art cinema. His new movie that he is currently in pre-production on is called Triangle of Sadness and is about the fashion industry. And that's a thing that can make anybody happy to hear a title like that and a subject matter that. I think that is going to be excellent.
Yeah, when I saw Force Majeure, it's another one of those movies that's about a different country. It's set in his native country of Sweden, but it's this family drama, basically, and about this one moment where a father in a family just does this horrific, cowardly thing and all the repercussions that come from it. And it's really funny, but also really dark and really just kind of like frank about the nature of humanity. And it's really exciting. It's being remade with Will Ferrell and Julia Louis-Dreyfus in the starring roles, so that might tell you something about the universality of that story and, how exciting it might be to transfer to different actors.
Yeah, that's going to be really fascinating, I think. The Square was, to me, one of the most interesting films that came out in 2017. Is sort of like outlandish and large, tonally sort of very out there, but also really smart and intellectually very adventurous. And as you'll hear in this conversation, he's a really, really thoughtful guy. And they talk about some pretty profound stuff. I love the fact that they managed to talk about sort of big ideas, but in a way that's like really engaging and entertaining at the same time.
Yeah, the theme that I really saw run through this conversation was how important it is to step out of binary thinking, how important it is to step away from false dichotomies.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the things that Lulu talks about is the problem of when you have a particular identity, when you're telling a story, people are saying, well, are you for something? Are you against it? Because she has emerged as one of the most important Asian American filmmakers of her generation with this movie, people want to pin her down to like, are you pro-China? Are you anti-China? Are you pro this? Are you against that? And it's, reality and stories are not black and white. They're not one thing or the other. And one of the really nice moments of this conversation is Ruben talks about the role that cinema plays in our lives, which is kind of about the way that we have discussions. And I thought that was really fascinating.
We also hear about the way these complex questions are tackled in the media.
And how the internet turns us into shitty people as well, which is, I think, is an interconnecting subject matter, to be honest.
Yeah, you can't blame them for thinking any of that about how social media ruins people. But you also think about the power of social media for spreading the word about the farewell, and then also force majeure in the square before that, which, any indie filmmaker is definitely aware of that. So it's a real catch-22. The thing you hate is also bringing you success.
Mm-hmm. It was so fascinating to hear how people in Sweden think Ruben's movies are so heavy and dark, and how the rest of the world actually thinks they're comedies.
We also get to hear what Lulu and her boyfriend Barry Jenkins kick back and watch when they're wanting to watch something a little less serious.
And then there's also Lulu's response to what happened when she was told by some American bro to go back to Japan.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
She's a small lady, but fierce indeed.
Should we run the tape?
Let's run the tape.
Hi, Ruben. How are you? Can you?
I'm fine. How are you?
I'm good. I'm so excited to talk to you. We didn't meet directly, but sort of in passing a few years ago when my boyfriend is Barry Jenkins. He presented your award.
Okay. Yeah. Cool. But really nice to talk to you, and thank you so much for the film.
I requested, they asked me who I would like to speak to, and I said, of course, ideally it would be Ruben, but nobody told me that you had agreed, and I just found out yesterday. So I'm very, very excited. Your work is a huge inspiration for me.
Thank you so much. I mean, I have heard people talking about The Farewell, and then when Nick sent me your name, and then I was like, yeah, of course, I would like to do that. So I think I like the setup of this format that two film directors are talking to each other. So I'm curious if we will get to any interesting content, hopefully.
I have a lot of questions.
I would like to start actually because I watched The Farewell last night. I got the link quite late, but I watched it last night, and I would like to say thank you so much for the movie. I thought it was interesting because I could relate very much to the story, even if I don't have any of that kind of background. Mm-hmm. It was very touching, and I think I related a lot to it because my mother comes from the northern part of Sweden. So she's brought up in Haparanda, that is quite far away from where I was brought up in Göteborg, in Gothenburg, on the west coast of Sweden. But I could really relate to your parents leaving China and then moving, and you growing up in another country. And I would say that my mother have always felt a little bit, almost misplaced, that there was something about her that she said that she would move back when she got older and so on. But then I got kids, and she was then staying here in Göteborg with me because of the grandchildren, of course. But I had a similar experience when I met my grandfather the last time. That was really, really beautiful portrayed in your film when you were leaving in the car. Mm-hmm. And the last glimpse, or how do you say, of your grandmother. I was up in Haparanda with my daughters, and I realized that this is probably the last time I would see my grandfather. And since I don't visit Haparanda that often, and we were leaving in the car, we were saying goodbye at the entrance of the door, and then getting into the car. And I could see that even he had such a problem of walking. He would stand up and look through the window, the kitchen window, and try to get a last glimpse of us. And it was so touching. And when I saw it, it was striking me immediately in the same way that you portrayed the scene in the film. So thank you for that.
Oh, thank you. Wow. Yeah, it is. It's so hard to, in a way, they want to have a last glimpse, but I think there's also this sense of dignity of, as a human being, like wanting to stand, wanting to come downstairs, wanting to say goodbye, and holding on as much as possible. Like people have told me that in their experience, they've experienced something similar where, you know, their grandmother, grandfather also will like touch the car as it's driving away. So it's so interesting to hear that immigration and this sense of distance and displacement, it's not just as extreme as an immigrant from China moving to the United States. I think that, you know, as the world is getting bigger but getting smaller in many ways, that everyone senses this kind of displacement because we're not growing up and all living, you know, multiple generations in the same town. My parents, the history of my family and why, you know, we moved for mostly political reasons. My father came to the U.S. to study, to get his PhD, but my father used to be a diplomat for the Chinese government since the age of 9, and went to the Soviet Union at the age of 16. And then when he was 30, I think 33, is when he moved to America, and he later started working for the State Department. But I've always found his story very interesting because he was raised from, you know, the age of as a child to be a nationalist, to love country. And yet I think later he felt very betrayed by the trust that he put and the value that he put as a, you know, belonging to the state, that he would be taken care of always. And he wasn't. And then when he came to the U.S., he very much embraced being an American. He thought, well, this is a place where you can really put your trust in the state, and really, really wanted to be seen as American, wanted to be an American, wanted to work for the government. But of course, because of his history, he could never build enough trust. There was no way that he could ever get past the background checks. And so in a way, he is this somebody who, from a young age, has been trained to give up the sense of individual and devote his life to country. And now in his older age, it's like, well, what country do I truly belong to? Because nobody will have me. And it brings up this question of, like, you know, how do we identify? Is it by blood? Is it by where your heart belongs? Is it by politics? You know, is it by culture? Like, these are all very different things. And yet, even in modern society, we're asked to be very reductive about it. And it's like, what are you?
And your identity, what do you feel about your identity when you, how many percentage do you feel Chinese and how many percentage do you feel American?
I feel pretty American. I mean, you know, I would say I feel 100% American. But it's, how do other people look at me? You know, there's moments in which, like, internally, I've never felt more American than when I'm in China. That's when I realize, oh, I am very, very, very American.
Yeah, of course.
But, you know, there's, of course, moments in which you're reminded that you are not seen this way. You know, like a few years ago, I was in Nantucket at a bar and just trying to get a drink, and this very tall guy was kind of pushy and wouldn't let me through. And I was like, excuse me, you know, can I just grab a drink? And he's like, just go back to China. He said, go back to Japan. And I was so stunned by that. And I wasn't sure if I should comment on his ignorance first or just, and laugh at his ignorance or be offended. I didn't even know what to say in that moment. I just kind of stood up on a bar and threatened to punch him. Which showed how American I am.
Exactly.
You know?
You react with violence.
It's true, yeah.
I think it's interesting with, I mean, in these times also, of course, when we're talking about how we are dealing with racism and things like that. And I made a film that is called Play, that was based on events that took place in Gothenburg, where I live, where it was a group of young boys that was robbing other young boys. and the robbers, they had one thing in common, and it was that they were black. And they were like 12 years old or something, these boys that were doing the robberies. And then they were really, really aware of how to use like the stigmatized image of the black man, the dangerous black man, that Swedish kids only have gotten to know through media experiences from fiction films, etc., etc. And I think in Sweden now, when it comes to like how media is trying to deal with these things, we have an extreme right-wing party that is called the Sweden Democrats, and people are like screaming racists about them all the time, over and over again, and every stupid comment they do that is like a racist comment gets fully exposure in the papers. So it's like bringing out the bad behavior, giving it oxygen over and over again. And I was thinking about my daughters that is going in a school when I was younger, when they were going from grade 1 to grade 9. Then they have a lot of different ethnicities and backgrounds on the kids. And they have never heard about the idea about racism. And then all of a sudden, when they get a little bit older, then they learn that, okay, there's something in this society that's called racism. And the one that is put up for racism are like some of your classmates. And then suddenly they are trained into this way of thinking. So I think it's an interesting topic, how to handle it and how to deal with it, and in which occasions you should give this kind of problem oxygen and bring it up, or in which situations you should just like, I won't go there. I won't comment on this guy. I won't say anything. So yeah.
Yeah, I love that. I love Play so much because I was really surprised when I watched it, because I feel like so many stories in the world now, because in a way you almost can't separate news with fiction, you know, and so all the stories in the world right now are creating a very distinct binary, good versus bad, racist or not racist. And I found it so interesting to explore all of the nuances and sort of the self-awareness of how to utilize things, and what does knowledge do for, like, what does that awareness do for the characters, and utilizing that. I don't know if that makes sense, but I love that it's not clean, you know, it starts a conversation and that people might disagree, but that it's really nuanced, because I find myself asking a lot of questions that I'm afraid to say in the world, because it's almost like if the minute that you start arguing on one side, then you must be labeled as XYZ, right?
Yeah.
And so, for example, like what you were just saying, I experienced this recently with the Me Too movement, where I said, you know, I started talking to my mom and I said, you know, like all of this stuff is reminding me of this neighbor that we had. Do you remember? Like he used to like grab all the kids in the pool and he would chase after the girls. And one time he locked us in the house and tried to pull his pants down. And, you know, I came and I told you about that. And I said, you know, but back then, like nothing happened to him, right? He wasn't arrested or anything like that. And I said, and I told you about that. And she said, yeah. And I told you just to stay away from him. And she said, you know, like you came and told me. And I said, you know, just don't go near him, and didn't make a big deal out of it. And I really thought about that. I said, you really didn't make a big deal out of it. And it never really traumatized me in a way maybe that it should have. And do you think that it's because, like, what do you think that is? Do you think it's like, in a way, I can't help but think if my parents made a really big deal out of it, and they had the man arrested, and they told me, oh my God, this is so wrong, like, it would have put so much of the shame and weight on me as a child. But in many ways, it was just like, my mom just said, you know, he's a gross man, like, just don't go near him. And so there was a levity to it where it was gross and it was icky and we stayed away, but it didn't continue to impact me emotionally.
Sorry, continue.
No, so that's all and I made this short film called Touch that explores that, because in some older parts of some villages, you know, oftentimes it's cultures that are not exposed to Western media and media in general. But it's kind of cultural that sometimes older people will just touch children's private parts. And so especially older men and little boys, but not in a sexual way. A lot of times it's a sign of affection or a sign of virility, that it's because it's great to have a boy, it's great to have a son in the family. And so my father, because he's a translator, came across several of these cases while he was working for the State Department of people who came to the U.S. as immigrants and worked at a flea market or some kind of a job where they didn't have a lot of access to Westerners and didn't speak English. But there were like 3 different cases where the men was in a bathroom or somewhere and touched somebody. And to in their mind, it's very innocent. It's in their mind, it's, like they knew the family. So when they saw the boy, and I depict this in the short film in Touch, you see the way he touches. It's just, oh, you're so cute. Oh my God, look how cute. But the older brother sees it and runs out of the bathroom, tells the mom, and it spirals into this really big thing. Yeah. And then my father, as a translator, has to try and explain between the judge and without defending, because the judge is saying, well, do you think this is ethically right? Is this in China? Is this like a cultural tradition? And he's like, well, I don't want to call it a tradition because it's not like something that we all applaud and think this is a great ritual, but it's a habit. You could say that it's a habit that isn't looked down upon, and it is cultural. Like he didn't have a sense of awareness, and how do you educate an immigrant on all of these nuances of culture, right? So he did it without knowing, but so then, because he has a different context, how do you punish him and through what lens? And for that child, if he's told that this is sexual and this is bad, does he grow up to think that? Does he carry all that shame? Whereas if you're a child and you're told like that's just your grandpa, he doesn't mean anything by it, because in his mind, how can you this is a young child. There's a sexuality doesn't even come into it for him, So there's an innocence to it, but the law comes in and spins it.
And I think I started to think about 2 things when you tell me this story. I would love to see the short film. Please send a link.
Yeah.
If you have one.
Absolutely. Yeah, I do. Mm-hmm.
I was thinking about 2 things. One was like during the Second World War, when all the men had left Berlin and were in war. So the German men were out and like dealing with the Second World War, and there were a lot of Russian soldiers in Berlin, and there was a lot of rapes happening on the German women. And the way that they were dealing with this was that they were considering it as a nature disaster, basically. Like, oh my God, it's raining. Oh no, I have to run, it's raining. I got away from the rain. Oh no, I ended up in the rain. And that made it mentally possible for them to deal with it. They didn't do it into anything that was personally aimed towards them. But the problem happened then when the men come home after the war. Then like when the shame was put into it, and then it became a huge problem to deal with it. And the other thing that I was thinking about is when it comes to, for example, sexuality, when it comes to our new times, when we are using our phones and so on, and we're sending pictures to each other, and the concept of shame porn, where you are taking a picture of like a girl, of course, that have been nude. I don't have heard about it really when boys are exposed in that way. And they put up these pictures on the internet. And I had a friend of mine, it's a controversial idea, but he is quite fun in twisting and turning our minds when we are thinking about these things. And he said, well, the best way of dealing with shame porn is that everybody have to put a nude picture of themselves on the internet, because then it will be no problem anymore. Yeah. So it's interesting with what you say about your short film, because I really like films that is like making us see things from a different perspective, and we also have to ask questions about our own culture. And not accept the consensus. I love when our consensus are questioned, and we have to try to rethink, is we actually doing this in the best way?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and I've read interviews where you talk about the media and the intention, because they need clicks. And so it's all about not resolving a conflict, but actually creating more conflict, right? And so that you can tell by the headlines even, right? The way that and I've done interviews as well where I talk for a very, very long time, and then the headline gets narrowed down into like one very kind of a clickbaity kind of headline. And
have you experienced this now with your new film?
Oh, yes, absolutely. And not in a negative way. I think the journalists aren't trying to put me in a negative light, but just to kind of make a statement. But I can't help but think to myself, well, it's much more complicated than that, you know. But then of course, if you read the comments, which I really try not to, but once in a while I do go down that rabbit hole, and the comments are in reaction to a headline.
Yeah.
And because I'm Asian and I'm a female director, and it's about like one side or the other, and I'm either pro or I'm against, and it's like, you know, I'm just trying to tell a story about my family, you know, and I wanted to fight for the specificity of the story because that's my experience, you know, that I'm just trying to put my experience up on screen like anybody else. And yes, it's a political statement because there's so few people who look like me doing it, but it's also not a political statement because it's just my family and I'm just a human trying to tell my story.
Yeah, sometimes when I'm thinking about like the things that is going on the internet, it's almost like, okay, we have to start to consider the world that is digital in a different way from the world when we are meeting people in an analog way, when we actually have a meeting. Because my feeling is that we actually are behaving quite nice to each other. It's very seldom, I mean, that someone is doing something rude or are reacting in the way that is constantly brought up by media or in the commenting fields or so on. I mean, your experience in the bar for me is like sounds like something that doesn't happen that often. But if you look at the internet, people have a anonymous thing to hide themselves about, and then it's almost like there's a certain kind of behavior that is brought up that we have to start to think about. Okay, this is actually not saying the truth about human beings. It's a behavior that maybe now, when we are living in a new time, when we have the possibility to express ourselves and be anonymous, it will hopefully go back to that we are trained in, and also understand that we have to be like editors of our own comments. Mm-hmm. That we actually have a responsibility as a publisher when we are publishing something.
Do you think a lot about responsibilities in your films? Because you've talked a lot about not having violence in your films because you haven't experienced it. And I really resonate with that because I do think that there's so much romanticization of violence in the media, especially American media and American storytelling. You can have guns and people getting their heads blown off, but you can't show a woman's nipple. Yeah. And so I do wonder, like, the people who are telling those stories, have they ever actually experienced that kind of violence? And if they did, would they have a different point of view?
Yeah. No, I definitely think that is one of the most interesting things to be a film director, and one of the most important things. What kind of experience are we handing over to the audience? Is it experiences that we have from the cinema world, or is it something that we have a connection to in our life for real? Is this references that on how we look on the world, or is it like something that is
fantasy,
fiction on a way that it created from a fictionalized world? And I think that in the same way, if you're having a conversation with someone, you don't start to lie. You don't start to say, don't walk in that part of the city because it's super dangerous to be there if it's not true. That is unethical. Mm-hmm. And the same thing, of course, goes for cinema. Why should you start to lie about your experience in life? Your images will create a behavior. Your images will change people's behavior. And I think that moving images is one of the expressions that is probably changing human behavior more than anything else, more than still image even. And there are scientists that is talking about like that. If you look on our memories, like 70% of our memories today comes from mass media. Mm-hmm. So if we look at that then, of course, how we express ourselves about the world through fiction film is going to have a great impact on how people look at the world. So I think that is something that is very important to relate to and have an idea about. Then you're, of course, allowed to use your knowledge in any way you want. I'm not saying that we should have a censorship and you're not allowed to express your wildest fantasies, but at least we should be aware of that. Images, the more they are spread out, the more they will change people's behavior. And I don't think it matters if it's, because when I was brought up, then it was like a difference between documentary images or things that is said in the news or what's in the fiction films. Then it was like these are three separated categories, and fiction film is not affecting how we behave. I don't believe in that at all, because I think with a little time aspect on when we have experienced these images, we can separate them from a real life experience or not. So, for an example, I tried to investigate this in a film that is called Incident by a Bank, where I made a reconstruction of a failed robbery attempt that I experienced myself. And I had never seen anything like that before in my life, but I have seen many, many films that was portraying this. What happens when it was me and my producer, Eric Hemmendorf, that one day we are standing in the street in Stockholm, and he's saying, do they have ski masks on them? Are they going to rob someone, you know? And I look over the street and I see on a moped, there's like two guys, and under the helmets, it's white masks sticking out. And I'm trying to get make this make sense. So I'm like saying, maybe they are dealing with racing, you know, and they have these flame-proof masks in order to protect themselves. And he's like, why should they have that? They're just a moped, you know. And these two robbers, they are very nervous and very stressed. So they are like going up on the curb and going across the street on red light. And then they are opening up the saddle and taking out two guns. And suddenly we realize, okay, oh my God, it is a robbery. And Eric is like saying, okay, should we call the police? And, you know, I'm like, no, we don't need to do that. You know why? Because under the desk in this jewelry store where they are going, there's a button. And when they push that, the police will come immediately, which is something that I create 100% from the fiction movies I have seen. I don't have a clue. So it was so interesting to see my own reaction was that I using the fiction references that I've had in my life and trying to explain the world that I was seeing in front of me. And what was happening was that the world it looked so surreal, so I couldn't compare it with my references. I thought the robbery would be like super efficient. I thought they would go. It was what happening on the other side of the street was completely absurd because the robbers went to the wrong entrance. First, and then they jump on the moped and they go to the other entrance and they start to shoot a lot of gunshots and no one gets scared. You know, everybody's like just looking, trying to get closer to have a look on what's going on. I thought life would stop. I thought that the robbers would be the main characters of the world for that second, but it didn't happen. And so it was so many details of that happened that like made me aware of in which way the fiction movies had like changed my perception on events like that.
Yeah, and it's so hard to take a step back and then find another perspective, right? Because you really have to have objectivity. You have to take yourself out of being the victim, being the bank robber, being the hero or the victim or whatever, you know, that the archetype is in the media that we watch. And that's what I loved about Incident by a Bank when I watched it, because it's a completely different perspective. It's going away from the drama. It's actually the how mundane it is to witness a robbery. And it's something that I was trying to explore in The Farewell also, because as we were developing the script, there was always notes coming back that said, well, shouldn't there be a climax? Well, we need some kind of catharsis. You know, she must find out. And either she has to find out somehow. She must fall to the ground and get sick, and then she goes to the hospital, and then she finds out, and then there's this moment of confrontation. And I said, yeah, but you know, for me, having gone through this experience, I also felt that way. So for me, the drama was that in my mind, it felt like there should be a catharsis. If this were a movie, there would be that moment where I could talk to her
So you almost provoked it to happen then, or no?
Well, I mean, the whole time I wanted to tell her the truth. First of all, I believe that she should know. And then also, in my mind, even before going there, one of the reasons why in real life I rented a camera is because I thought, wow, this is going to be really dramatic. And maybe one of the good things that'll come out of this is that I'll film some stuff and also if I have a camera, I'm going there as a filmmaker, as a documentarian. I'm not a participant. I am an observer, and it'll keep me distanced so that I don't start crying, and then my grandma will know. If I start crying and I break down, that's disaster, right? But if I can stay objective and observant, so that's why I brought the camera. But what was interesting was that all of the drama was inside of my head. Was my desire for not necessarily desire, but almost the inclination, the sort of expectation for drama, and the drama was the lack of drama, and that's what I was trying to pitch, to my producers and explain to them, was that actually nothing happens, and that's why it's dramatic. And they were like, wait, huh? What?
When you say these things, I think it's so funny. Every time I bring up my phone and I'm filming something, I see this YouTube moment happening in my mind. The other day I was flying on this airplane and I could see flashes from a cloud, a thunder cloud. And of course, when I start to film it, I'm just waiting for the flash to hit the airplane or something like that. I almost want it to happen, Or when I'm filming a cat, I'm just waiting for it to attack me. Or it's like the absurdity of how these expectations of the images that we have been consuming is changing our perception of things. And I thought it was interesting because, I think that today, if you look on how the movie industry have been dealing with storytelling, I think there have been a difference between the American movies and the European movies, and the Anglo-Saxon storytelling with like a protagonist and an antagonist. I think it's very problematic in to explain the world in a binary way like that. And in many ways, I would say like the European film culture have been a way of trying to fight that way of movie tradition, to try to be another reference to life, to try to tell about the life in a different way. But today, I must say that fight is over. The Anglo-Saxon way of describing the world have won. And if you look, for an example, on news media today in Sweden or any Western country, I guess, there's no story without a protagonist or antagonist. You always have a main character of an event. It's always told through an individual that either have done something good or that have done something bad. So I think this is something that we need to talk so much more about, especially when it comes to news reporting. Because the journalists today, I think they are using this storytelling way in order to, of course, attract an audience. But the consequences of that is that we are taking away so many ways of looking at the world. And if everything is put into this format of storytelling, then it will be interesting to see what the consequences of that will be.
Yeah, and I've been wanting to ask you, because you make comedies. I wouldn't call them comedies.
It's so funny because, in Sweden, everybody thinks the films are so horrible and scary, and Force Majeure was like a film that is like, oh my God, this is such a heavy topic, and how can you do this? It's so heavy, and who is supposed to look at it? And I'm like, it is comedy. I think it's a dark comedy. It's satire in many ways. But then it's a relief for me also when people are saying in other countries it's a comedy. But it's almost like when the films are screened in Sweden, the reactions that I have to deal with is so much, oh, it's so horrible. And I'm like, I don't understand what they are talking about.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, I think that's so interesting too. And it's one of the reasons I love your films. I think they talk about so many things, they explore so many things, they're very, very emotional, and yet they're hilarious. And it's the situational comedy, and it's this absurdist comedy, and it's the wide shots are something that I respectfully stole from you. Seeing the way that you describe Force Majeure as a family thriller, I really responded to, and I approached The Farewell in a similar way of getting really internally, it's a thriller, it's a horror film for the characters. And and building that tension and always having the lie be the monster in the room, in the same way that for your main character in Force Majeure, that the unspoken elephant in the room, you always feel it, even though you don't see it. I mean, do you think that people's ability to laugh see your film as a comedy or laugh is somehow connected to their ability to laugh at themselves? I ask because I've had very interesting reactions to my film of some people saying, "Oh my God, it's being billed as a comedy. If you watch the trailer, they're trying to sell it to you as a comedy, but it's so sad. I cried the entire time." And then other people will say, "Oh my God, it's being sold to you as a drama, but it's really hilarious." And I don't think that they're pushing the comedy enough. And so it's nice to really get it from both sides. But I also have people who are outraged, where they go, "I love the film, but the only thing that ruined it for me are people who are laughing in moments that are not funny at all." And the filmmaker, she would be so upset to know this. And I think, oh my gosh, if you only knew how not upset I am. I think it's hilarious, and I think that you can laugh and cry at the same time, and that there's no one prescription. But it's interesting when that people get so they fight for it so hard, and I wonder what that is.
Yeah, I think you point out the reason why cinema is important for me, at least right now. Because I think that, okay, what are one of the few reasons that we should go to the cinema today, since we can watch movies at home and pretty much have the same kind of quality? Well, it is to watch something together. And if we are watching something together, if everybody agrees, then there is no reason to watch it together. We have to have something to discuss afterwards. So the content have to be in some way that we maybe don't 100% agree. And for me, a film should raise questions that the audience afterwards have to start to try to verbalize and compare the different versions, because otherwise there's no reason of going to the cinema. So like if you look at the format film, or like film that are put in packages like comedy or drama or thriller and so on, if they don't take their audience seriously, if they don't look at the audience that they are adult and intelligent people, afterwards it feels kind of empty to leave the cinema. Very often I find myself of not understanding, why did I go here, sit in silence for 2 hours, and now afterwards I'm leaving the cinema with this person that I went to the movie together with, and we don't have anything to talk about. I almost always regret myself that I did go to the film. I'm thinking, why didn't we sit down and talk instead? We should just have a glass of wine and sit and talk and try to come to a great conversation. And sometimes when I'm at home, okay, I need a break from everything. Then I'm looking at ski films. So I started out as a ski filmmaker. So then I look at ski films. It's completely stupid. It's like people skiing down from a ski slope and trying to do spectacular tricks in the air. And that's my...
I watched Barry and I watch home renovation videos. We watch HGV, people, and everyone's like, "You're both independent filmmakers. What important films do you watch on your time off together?" And we're like, we watch Love It or List It. They're going to fix the house or buy a new one.
No, but and I think we have to respect that human being works in that way, that we need relaxation, and we can consider some parts of the film industry is something like that. It's not going to deal with bringing in new topics and questions in our lives, and it's not always that we have the energy to deal with that kind of content. But there also needs another side of the film industry and the movies that we make. But for me, when I'm going to the cinema, all the effort to go to the cinema and sit down there, then I really need something to talk about afterwards. Otherwise, I feel like, I could have stayed at home.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree. That's why I like films that don't give you the answers and really leave things open-ended and in many ways argue both sides of it enough that there's something to really think about.
Yeah. Can I ask you something? Oh, sorry, no. Continue.
No, go ahead. Yes.
When it comes to the content of your film, do you also see like there's something happening in the movie industry that they are now trying to make films that can have an audience both on a Chinese market and on an American market? and that this content, of course, that is the good side of capitalism, of course, that suddenly like we are looking for a content that can work in both, and actually then it comes out a great film. But how do you look on that? Do you feel that this is content also is connected to a window in the time now on how you look on the movie industry and the distribution system?
Yes, absolutely. I think that 10, 20 years ago, nobody would be interested in China at all. But China is a big part of financing now, as well as just the marketplace. And so when I was trying to do Farewell, the main interest in it was from that perspective. Oh, here's a story that, kind of is a bridge between China and America. We could market it for both markets and audiences. But still people were trying to figure out, well, is this an American film or a Chinese film? And trying to put me in a box. But if I said if it was an American film, then it had to look a certain way, and people couldn't speak in Chinese, and we couldn't have subtitles. But if it's a Chinese film, then the main character has to be Chinese. It cannot be somebody who's coming from America and in any way disagreeing or criticizing the Chinese perspective. And so there was no space for a story like this one that was actually just a human story of what it's like to be in between these two worlds. And I had to actually really push hard when finding my producing partners to say that, I actually don't know if it's possible to make a film to appeal to both markets. I don't know that it's possible to make a good film in general when you're just trying to appeal to a market. First and foremost, you have to tell the story that you want to tell, and then you can look at who wants to see it. But we went into it trying to be a co-production, but my producers agreed that ultimately, if the censorship required us to change too many things in the script, that we would not jeopardize the movie in order to accommodate that. Because, and that was an ongoing debate, was, well, how many notes, how many changes is too many? Where do you draw the line? And if you give an inch, what if they want to take a foot? And at what point does the movie no longer belong to the artist, to us as filmmakers, and we are pandering? And so, I drew the line pretty close. I said, I'm not changing anything, not a single shot. And they said, well, can you give one shot? I mean, it's just one image. And I said, it's too early in my career to start to do that. I fought too hard for this movie. It's too personal. So I'm not giving in at all. But it was a hard battle to fight.
But have it had cinema release in China?
We now have, the co-production status, and we have, it's called the Dragon Seal. And I won't talk about this on record, but if you want, we can talk more about how we had to navigate that in order to get it. But it took a lot of navigation.
Okay, interesting.
They're giving me the wrap up, Ruben. I think that we're out of time.
Okay.
I'm sorry. I could talk to you forever. I want to.
Yeah, but likewise, it was really fun to talk to you, and I have a lot of things. Thank you so much for the film, and I'm looking forward for your next one. Are you working on a new one now, or?
I am. Yeah, I'm starting to work on it, but it's hard to kind of do it in the middle of all of the press still for this one. But I'm working on something that's science fiction. And so I want to talk to you. I want to pick your brain about how you think I can approach science fiction, but from a documentary perspective still, no reflection of the real world.
Interesting. But let's talk about that when we are off.
Yes.
And if you want money, then we can get some money from Sweden, maybe. I don't know. That was basically what you wanted to ask me.
That's really, I just, this whole conversation was so that I could pitch you and get financing from Europe. Thank you so much. This was wonderful.
Yeah, thank you so much, and really nice have the opportunity. And say hello to Barry also.
I will. Thank you. We'll talk soon. Okay.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Lulu Wang, Ruben Östlund, thank you so much for joining us here on the Talk House podcast.
I love when the pairings we put together for the Talkhouse podcast lead to some kind of collaboration or something in the works. I'd love to think that Ruben, maybe, a co-producer or executive producer on Lulu's new movie.
I'm here for it.
I think that'd be very, very exciting.
You guys make things happen.
Katie, you have an episode of Little Gold Men that just dropped today that has an excerpt of today's conversation and a lot more about Lulu and Ruben.
Yeah, and it's also part of the Little Gold Men book club that we've been running this month, where we're going to have a discussion of the Joan Didion book, The Last Thing He Wanted, which is going to be a movie from Dee Reese coming up soon. So more talk about powerful female directors. We're in a really interesting time with the show because we're about to hit the fall festivals of Toronto and Telluride. So there will be so many movies to talk about soon. But for now, we're kind of just looking forward, which is another reason it's so fun to have Lulu and Ruben, because we get to talk more about The Farewell.
Yes. Today's conversation was recorded by Jakob Herrmann at Top Floor Studios in Gothenburg and here in New York by our co-producer, Mark Yoshizumi. The Talkhouse's theme song was composed and performed by The Range. You can follow The Talkhouse on all socials at Talkhouse.
Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, MySpace, Talkbook, Backsquare.
And subscribe to the show. We have some amazing episodes coming down the pipeline right now.
And you can find Little Gold Men on Apple Podcasts or any other podcast platform that you prefer. And you can follow us on Twitter at Little Gold Men. And you can find me and all my Little Gold Men colleagues at vanityfair.com.
Katie, thanks again for joining us here on the show. Let's do more stuff together soon.
You can count on it.
Till next week, I'm Elliot Einhorn.
Nick Dawson.
Peace. And Little Gold Men.